I'm joined by Martin Baker, who is with Project 21, Black Leadership Network. Martin, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Charles, thank you for having me.
Okay, Martin, so there's a controversy that you are covering with regard to ESPN and their exclusion of Sage Steele from a conversation. So why don't you give us some background on the situation?
What it simply boils down to is that Ms. Steele, who happens to be biracial, was told by some of her ESPN colleagues that by nature of that she was, quote unquote, not black enough to speak on racial issues. And apparently ESPN seemed to agree with that.
Now, when you say she wasn't black enough, it sounds like Joe Biden's comment that you're not really black unless you vote for him. Now, why would they think that she's not black enough? I mean, how insulting and offensive is that, anyway?
As I said, it is because that she's biracial, and and as a father of two biracial children myself, I was quite offended by it when I heard that, and then when I see the statement itself and hear it, it is very offensive, and I
Extremely.
was very surprised that ESPN even countenanced it.
Now, didn't this have something to do with her political orientation?
One of the things that a lot of the commentators or the personalities on ESPN is that they have tried for years to not make ESPN being political. They try to focus strictly on sports. But as we're starting to get into this era where social awareness, whatever phrase you want to throw out there, ESPN is apparently getting a little bit more lenient and allowing their personalities to take more of a stance. And Ms. Steele stance apparently did not vibe as well with her other racial peers.
So, what exactly was she saying politically that they rejected?
Politically, she was just speaking on her views, just as a private citizen, as anyone else would. But in their view, because of the fact that she is a biracial person, she doesn't have a right to say anything, and that she's not fully black, so she doesn't have a right to have a dog in that hunt, so to speak.
Well, I would suggest that they probably would have considered her to be fully black if she had expressed a leftist view. Uh, but
Probably.
but the problem is that she was questioning, for example, the issue of people kneeling at sports games. Now,
Absolutely.
I mean, and I personally do not think anyone should kneel, any American should kneel for any reason. I mean, one of the reasons we got rid of King George III was because we didn't want to kneel before a king. You know, Americans
Absolutely.
aren't supposed to kneel for any reason. And as a Jew, I would add, I mean, the Torah tells me in the book of Esther never to kneel before anyone but God. You know,
Absolutely.
we are to when Mordecai was told to kneel to Haman in the book of Esther, he said, "I don't kneel to anyone but God," which set off a chain of events. And that to me is the American standard. We don't kneel. Now, to protest, sure, maybe to express political opinions, but this whole idea of kneeling seems utterly un-American to me. And I guess that she criticized the whole business of kneeling in sports, and for that reason, she was excluded, I think, from this event. It wasn't so much her biracial element, because if she had been pro-left, they would have overlooked that and they would have declared her as properly black, which is to say, on the leftist reservation.
I absolutely agree with you on that. She also came under fire, so to speak, for Deshaun Jackson, who is a wide receiver in the NFL. He made some very anti-Semitic statements, and she was very critical of him for doing so as well. So again, that essentially is two strikes against Sage Steele for speaking with common sense. Is that she wants the equal rules to apply for everyone. I think I read somewhere that's sort of the American way, that everybody gets equal access and opportunity.
Or I mean, look, ESPN has a right to, I suppose, be biased and regulate their programming. We, on the other hand, have a right to expose that bias and question it. And in this case, they're advocating anti Semitic comments as if that's somehow appropriate for African Americans. I mean, or for anyone for that matter. And I'm really troubled to hear that.
Oh, it's very troubling. If you read some of Deshaun Jackson's comments, they were very inflammatory. They were very hateful, and it's very disheartening that someone with a stature, with a following, such as a professional athlete, can actually be able to say things like that. And I think back to when Charles Barkley years ago in a Nike commercial said that he's not a role model. Unfortunately, yes, professional athletes are. We all go buy jerseys, we buy shoes because we follow an athlete. We we buy tickets to their sporting events just so we can see that specific athlete. There are millions of children running around with Jordans who never even watched Michael Jordan play, for example. Why? Because they follow the model of others. And we're going to have this horrible trend of people saying that, well, if Deshaun Jackson can say this, the next athlete can say this, and it's going to turn to be a very ugly. It sets an ugly precedent.
And since when has ESPN gone so far into the left-wing tank, as it were?
I find it interesting and amusing that they went this far. Is that years ago they brought in Rush Limbaugh as an NFL analyst, and then chucked him overboard when he made a comment about then NFL quarterback Donovan McNabb, saying that there were so many people who had vested interest in Donovan McNabb succeeding as a professional quarterback just because of his color. And ESPN got rid of him as a Monday Night Football analyst just for that one comment.
After the George Floyd killing, there were riots in neighborhoods, particularly black neighborhoods, where black businesses were looted, black stores were burned, black people were killed. And then with the withdrawal of police responding to the defund police, you had an increase in crime in certain cities, particularly Chicago and St. Louis, where in Chicago in one night, almost 100 people were killed, most of whom were black, 3 of whom were children. How does that make you feel as a black American?
Well, not only am I a black American, but I am a resident of St. Louis County. And I see every day on the local news station, on the media, the latest crime that happened. And it's very disheartening. But because of the fact that it doesn't involve a white police officer or something that just shows outright racial bias, it becomes a page 2 who cares crime. And it's very disheartening as a people that we are being that destructive to ourselves.
How problematic and how systemic is police brutality targeting black men?
You have more of a likelihood of being struck by lightning as a black man than you do of being killed by the police. That's what the statistics will tell you. If you look at the crime numbers that the uniform crime statistics that the FBI puts out every year, you will see that there is very little of a likelihood of a black man or woman being killed by a police officer. There is more of a likelihood of a white person being killed by a police officer. And some people will say, well, that's because of population numbers. But when you extrapolate it and putting it all things being equal, so to speak, there still is going to be more of that likelihood of that white person.
Yeah, I mean, I think the statistics bear that out. What do you think of the organization Black Lives Matter?
The local organizations of Black Lives Matter are very honorable people.
Mm-hmm.
They want their community to be better. But when you nationalize it, and then when you co-opt it with every other left-leaning organization's agendas, then that's when you bring in the violence. That's when you bring in the crime. That's when you bring in all the bad actors. I remember back in 2014 when Black Lives Matter was first started out, and they started bringing in protesters into post-Ferguson. And you start to see the rioting, and all the statistics showed that most of the people that were being arrested for all the civil disobedience were not residents of the area, and they were brought in by Black Lives Matter.
So then they're I mean, they were founded, I understand, by three Marxists who were openly so. I mean, they've said in interviews, and that were inspired by this Weather Underground figure who helped train them, and also this various financiers. Money is funneling into them by the hundreds of millions of dollars from big corporations who they threaten to accuse of being racist. And a lot of that money is ending up in the Biden campaign. So I guess my question to you is, how is President Trump doing in the black community? Because in my mind, that should be a natural constituency for him.
Well, without trying to see like I'm leaning or trying to advocate or endorse on behalf of Project 21, with how the president is doing. But the numbers do show and bear out. Prior to President Trump being elected as president, he asked the black community, "What do you have to lose?" We're looking at a history of where you saw black businesses being closed over the previous 8 years. You're looking at black home ownership being lost. You're looking at numbers where you had double-digit unemployment of black males over the age of 18. But you're seeing a categoric shift of all of that over the past 4 years. So those numbers will bear out within themselves.
You know, there's nothing more threatening to the power structure of the left and of the Democratic Party than the black community waking up, becoming woke, if you will, and supporting their own interests. You know, I think the black community is naturally more conservative. They're more church going. They want entrepreneurialism. They want family. They want to get into business. They want better education for their children, which is why they're against these big, rotten inner city schools. And so they would want charter schools. They would want tax credits so they can go to private schools. They want to have more access to trade and to vocational training and all the things that President Trump stands for. So that's why I think they're launching this whole pseudo race war, primarily run, by the way, by white folks, to try to not only gin up support among their own base, but to try to keep black people in a state of emotion rather than thinking about their own self-interest. What say you?
I use a phrase called identity politics. As long as you can, as long as you can use general statements where white versus black, rich versus poor, north versus south, insert your versus phrase however you want to. That is how the left will divide and conquer. That their strategy is always going to be is to make someone seem like that they are at odds with a peer of whatever different culture, color, socioeconomic, whatever the case may be. This is how they use their strategize, and that's how they win. As conservatives, I don't even want to use the phrase Republicans or anything like that. As conservatives, what we need to do is we need to basically meet them head on with it. Is we need to fight fire with fire. They talk about their civil rights history on the left. We need to broadcast ours. We need to talk about how that essentially some political parties were founded on the abolition of slavery, on equal rights to everyone. And others were kind of slow, were kind of late to the dance, so to speak. But we don't do that. When someone screams racist at a conservative, our best response is no, we're not. We're not countering it with our own history and saying, you show me a situation where that any political party, any political group has been absolutely perfect in racial issues.
That's right. I mean, look, I don't doubt that, you know, plenty of conservatives might be racist or they might have made offensive comments that can be hurtful. But if you take a look at genuine racist policies over the past half century, they're really democratic policies, whether it be welfare, whether it be abortion, whether it be the destruction of the black church, whether it be education. We could go across the board. We could look at policies that have been destructive to black people in this country, and that they're mostly liberal, mostly run by white liberals too, by the way. And I think that if they're going to throw out the accusation of racist, which is an ugly accusation, a destructive one, then we can counter by saying, really, who is the real racist? Who has supported policies that hurt minorities in this country.
I mean, let's look at, first off, and I'm glad you brought that up. Let's look at the war on poverty that started in the 60s.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, only 23% of all the black families in the United States were single parent. But after the war on poverty started with the welfare state, with the introduction of all those social programs, meaning to uplift the black communities, you now have nearly 74%. 74%, that's 3/4 of black families in some way, shape, or form were single parent families. Where you had all these set aside that were well intentioned and well meaning, where you're pushing fathers out of homes, mothers are being pushed into positions that they shouldn't have to be.
Oh,
But
absolutely. The destruction of the black family. I mean, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Johnson administration, warned that this would happen. He also warned, I believe, that the black church would lose its moral authority and other institutions. I mean, the black family was more intact than the white family in those years. And look what's happened. Now you have fatherless families. You have an anti-business attitude that has prevented entrepreneurialism. You've got the introduction of drugs. You've got the introduction of crime. And so the last resort, in a way, the last line of defense are the police, ultimately. So that 98% of people in those communities want to get to work, they want to have a life, and that they cannot have to worry about being caught in a crossfire by a drug gang.
I agree with you absolutely. And it's very sad. Where it used to be one of the first lines of defense was the black church. But the black churches now are so worried about losing parishioners, i.e., losing offerings coming in, so they align themselves with well-pocketed leftist organizations. Will say, "Oh, we'll put a couple of dollars in your coffers, but we also need to have your building for our leftist meetings as well." While they are protecting their tax exempt status by not actually having them as headquarters for specific political candidates, but you can see which direction that the winds are shifting for them. And that also is taking those policies that for generations and generations had supported and lifted up the strength of the black family. You now are seeing them also attacking that, where you're having pastors saying, well, it's okay if you don't allow the father of your children to live there because we've got groups that are going to take care of you along with the government. When they're not empowering men to be fathers. They're not empowering mothers to let the fathers be there to support and lift and sustain a family. It's very scary that you see that this is what our society has become now.
Okay, my guest is Martin Baker, Project 21, Black Leadership Network. Martin, how are you, as an outspoken and public black conservative, received in your own community?
In my own community, it's very simple. It's 2014, when I was a former candidate for U.S. Congress. Immediately following the 2014 primaries, we had the horrible events of Ferguson. I made comments regarding due process of law for everyone. I even spoke and said that on the steps of the old courthouse in downtown St. Louis, in the presence of Al Sharpton, that I was all for due process of law for everyone, for Michael Brown's family and for Darren Wilson. Days later, I made the same comment at an event where Darren Wilson's name was publicly outed as the police officer who was involved in the shooting, and an idiot reporter from the UK Guardian put my name and my face on Twitter, and for lack of a better phrase, all hell broke loose, and the black community essentially turned on me. And then that's when they first started to question my blackness. And since then, I have been a pariah. My children's lives were threatened. It was not a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm really sorry to hear that. It's despicable that that would happen and that you'd, in a sense, be doxxed, and that's wrong. What do you think is going on now in terms of black support for the president, blacks voting for the president, or is there a movement away from this radical leftist, control at all?
you're always going to have blacks that are going to buck the trend. You're always going to have blacks that are going to defy what I like to call the generational beliefs of everyone, because you have to. Eventually, at some point, someone gets tired, or as my late grandma used to say, eventually you get sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
and
Who
and
knows?
that's what's happened. You see that, and it's not necessarily a specific political. It's not a specific political candidate. It could be that it's conservatism. It could be the fact that they're starting to read and embrace the Constitution. They're starting to really look at the history of Black America that had those leanings where strong families, they uplifted their own communities. And they're saying, why can't we do that today? Why can't we have our neighborhoods with our stores? Why can't we have our neighborhoods with our churches being mentors, being leaders? Why are we busing out all of our kids out of our local schools into neighborhoods where they can be more acclimated into things? When we can lift these future leaders in their own neighborhoods. These are things that are starting to awaken again. And it will happen as long as we diligently continue to strive at it. We can't fall asleep at the wheel. We can't just rest on the laurels of one success and say, we're done here. We have to keep challenging ourselves to be better than we were the day before.
Well, I mean, from your lips to God's ear. I mean, I think the black community, in a way, is dealing with the same malaise that my own Jewish community in America deals with. I mean, people are believing in the religion and the faith of socialism. It doesn't matter what's in your own interest. It doesn't matter, look, when you look at your own economic situation, your own family, what you want for your own life and your own destiny. It's what to do with the worship of this outside, fuzzy feeling of trying to change the world and transform human nature. It is completely bizarre. And I don't think that, conservatism or other philosophies that are of more self-interest are making great inroads into the Jewish community, putting aside the fact that the left and the Democratic Party has real anti-Semites in it, doesn't matter. They don't care. I mean, they're going to still goose step along and, vote lockstep for whoever the left puts up. And unfortunately, the black community, to a degree, is suffering from this same strange malaise. It's going to be very difficult to wake them up. And I certainly applaud you for trying to do it. It's really an amazing thing to watch. So, Martin, what do you think is going to happen in November?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. I would like to say that you're going to see an upswing of people who are going to be a lot of informed voters, but sadly, due to all the restrictions with the social distancing and everything like that, I sadly think that you may see a very low voter turnout. You're going to have a lot more uninformed voters, sadly, that this election might be a bit of a scary wash, more than you would hope for it would be the preferable most important election of our time, because the most recent election of our time. But we've never had an election under circumstances such as this. So you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be going to the polls, and they're not going to be as informed as they needed to be, because candidates have not been able to get out as the way that they should have. I see that often here in Missouri, and that's probably the same trend nationwide. So you may see a little bit more of the same. You may see a little bit of difference here, but it's not going to be some diametric shift that a lot of people are predicting. That's what my call of it is.
Well, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate, and I think that, however, if President Trump, by the way, there's an unprecedented number of black candidates running for Congress this year, and more of them are Republican than Democrat, which I think is interesting. And I believe that if President Trump can shave off even just 2% of the black vote and 2% of the Jewish vote, that would be huge. That would be revolutionary, actually.
What you typically have is you typically have Republican candidates who still typically hovers anywhere between 8 to 12% of the black vote all across anyway. I believe it was George W. Bush who plateaued up at 12% at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and you had John McCain who dropped down back to that 8%.
Right. Well, that's because Barack Obama.
And it wasn't because Barack Obama bounced with that. And you don't have that high power candidate on either side that's really going to that really appeals to the black candidates at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And again, without trying to lean one way or the other, or to show a preference either way. But what you will see is you'll start to see, as we get closer to November, you'll start to see the candidates on either side of the spectrum will try to curry favor with the communities that they need, where they need to target their votes in. And you'll see the attention that typically both sides will give the black community. You'll start to see them making appearances at the black churches, at the community centers, at the neighborhood centers, and all of that. And then the day after the election, they'll close up shop, and you won't see them again for the next 2 years or 4 years, right, which is the malaise that we continue to have, and we continue to allow it. We allow it. We are complicit. We are just as complicit in this as the major political parties are, because we allow them to continue to do it.
And they do it every 4 years. Although I hope that black people consider the administration that has resulted in the highest level of employment in the black community in American history, and that has engaged in prison reform, that has released 10,000 predominantly black men from prison who should never have been there in the first place, and other factors. I just hope they consider that on election day. Anyway, Martin, let my listeners and viewers know where they can find out more about you and your organization.
They can go to project21.org, and we are part of the National Center for Public Policy Research.
Excellent. Martin, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
My pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.